Welcome to our channel. It is generally known that insects are not very popular among people. But imagine if the Earth were covered with immense insects as it was over 300 million years ago. During that period, even before the dinosaurs, insects had gigantic dimensions. In today's video, we will explore why these insects were so enormous during that time, and whether they could still exist today, and what it would look like on Earth with these gigantic creatures. But before we delve into that, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and without further ado, let's get started. Life on Earth has existed for billions of years, and the geological periods that preceded the dinosaurs were relatively rich in animal species. Our Earth has undergone several geological cycles since prehistoric times. The animals and plants we see today are just evolutionary descendants of ancient creatures that lived hundreds of millions of years ago. To examine the gigantic insects, we must travel back in time more than 300 million years to the Carboniferous period, which was marked by astonishing transformations on Earth. It was during this time that the magnificent supercontinent Pangaea began to form, creating a landscape of vast swamps and lush, moist forests that provided ideal conditions for insects. However, gigantic insects were not the only oversized creatures that inhabited the planet during this era. The mysterious depths of the oceans harbored a vast array of marine life of gigantic proportions, including ancient forms of sharks and giant amphibians that reached lengths of tens of feet. Among the most well-known insect species that lived during that time was the giant dragonfly, Meganeura. Meganeura dominated the Earth before the dinosaurs, and is considered the largest flying insect ever to have existed. This precursor to the giant dragonfly spent most of its time in the air, where Meganeura preyed on spiders and other insects, but it also didn't hesitate to feed on smaller amphibians and even reptiles. No creature was safe from its enormity. During its lifetime, the wingspan of this dragonfly reached up to 75 centimeters, which is almost 30 inches. In addition to the dragonfly, various other repulsive creatures roamed the land, such as the giant millipede known as Arthropleura, which grew to lengths of over 2.5 meters, or over 8 feet. However, it wasn't a carnivore. It primarily fed on decaying vegetation. Another terrifying creature lurking in the swamps was the giant scorpion named Pulmonoscorpius. It reached lengths approaching 1 meter, or over 3 feet, and overall resembled a giant version of today's scorpions. According to scientists, this is related to the atmospheric oxygen content at that time. Millions of years ago, the air surrounding our planet was warmer, more humid, and contained more oxygen. When we look at the numbers, today's oxygen level is 21%, whereas during that period, oxygen levels were around 35%. In the case of insects, the rule applies. The more oxygen in the atmosphere, the larger the insects. Breathing in such an environment with such a high oxygen content allows us to be much more energetic and alert. But for insects, it's a bit different, mainly because they breathe differently than other creatures. Oxygen levels are particularly important for insects because they do not have lungs. Instead, they rely on air flowing through a series of openings in their bodies called spiracles, which connect to tissues through small tubes, supplying the oxygen they need. Oxygen was one of the key factors of gigantism present in insects at that time. But why did prehistoric insects disappear? Could they still exist today? Most likely, the disappearance of prehistoric insects can be attributed to changes in the atmosphere and the gradual decrease in oxygen levels in the atmosphere, which led to the shrinking and eventual disappearance of huge insects. Another factor could be the evolution of flying abilities among ancient dinosaurs, which eventually gave rise to modern birds. This development put pressure on insects through predation and competition. The oldest known bird, Archaeopteryx, appeared approximately 150 million years ago. Birds proved to be faster and more agile than the giant insects. As a result, insects faced challenges in survival and reproduction against these avian predators. What would it be like if there were giant insects on our planet today? If giant insects existed in today's world, it could lead to a real catastrophe and shocking consequences. Most likely, it would lead to a shift in the food chain hierarchy. Giant insects would compete with other animals for food and space, potentially leading to population imbalances or the extinction of other species. people would have to deal with new security threats and possible conflicts with giant insects. Due to their enormous size, it would be difficult to control their movement and activity, which could lead to attacks on humans and domestic animals. Giant insects could cause massive damage to agricultural crops and infrastructure, such as buildings and transportation routes, which would have a catastrophic impact on the economy and people's livelihoods. The presence of giant insects would evoke fears and panic in society. People would be afraid to leave their homes and carry out normal activities, leading to social and psychological tension. Due to their massive size, it would be challenging or even impossible to control and eliminate them. This would mean that we would be exposed to constant threat and uncertainty. In summary, the presence of giant insects in today's world could lead to apocalyptic scenarios where humanity would fight for survival, and efforts to preserve civilization would be threatened on all fronts. Although the existence of giant insects would be a fascinating discovery for scientists and could offer new insights into biology, ecology, and animal evolution, it would definitely not be worth it considering all the negatives that giant insects would bring. Although there are occasional reports of oversized insects in today's world, they are mostly inventions or observations of other known species resembling insects. Among the most famous discovered giant insect species today is, for example, the stick insect. Currently, according to the Guinness World Records, the world record for the longest insect is held by the species Phrygonistria chinensis, discovered in China in 2016, with one specimen measuring 25.2 inches, which is 64 centimeters. Another example is the Little Barrier Island giant, which could also be among the world's largest insects with its 4 inches, or about 10 centimeters. Additionally, there are Titan beetles, which can grow up to 6.6 inches, or nearly 17 centimeters in length, and the largest giant water bugs that can exceed 120 millimeters, which is 5 inches in length. By the way, even in the past, there are mentions of specifically documented cases of observing huge insects. For example, in ancient Chinese and Greek texts, there are mentions of gigantic creatures that could resemble insects. One example also comes from ancient Egypt, where there are hints of giant insect-like creatures associated with symbolism and myths. For instance, Egyptian religious texts often mention various kinds of creatures that could be interpreted as giant insects. However, these descriptions often contain mythical or symbolic elements, and skeptics question them. One example of testimony about giant insects appears in the work Historia Animalium by the Greek philosopher Aristotle, where he describes large insect-like creatures based on alleged observations. However, even though Aristotle and other ancient authors provide many detailed descriptions of animals, their works often include fantastic beings and mythical stories. Furthermore, some modern stories about giant insects have been reported within cryptozoological studies or in connection with alleged unexplained phenomena. However, these cases often lack evidence and can be explained by factors other than actual observations of giant insects. Overall, it is important to take these stories with caution and consider them in the context of their historical and cultural backgrounds. What do you think? Is there any truth to the giant insects in the ancient texts? That's all from us for today. If you're interested in videos filled with mysterious mysteries, dark stories, legends, or monsters, and you crave more, subscribe to our channel so you won't miss any new videos.